What if we can positively impact society by reshaping the mindsets of young men? And while we're at it, let me ask you, what does it mean to be a man? My name is Dennis Meralda, a father, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and a principal with over 2 decades of experience shaping the minds and characters of young men across the United States. If these questions resonate, if you're a young man looking to improve your life or a parent looking for tools to help your son become the best version of himself, the Building Men podcast was created for you. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Building Men podcast, or welcome back. If you have been here before, as always, I'm your host, Dennis Meralda, joined today by Justin Buonomo. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Justin, good to have you here, man. Justin is he's the host of the Holistic Hustle podcast, where he talks about his personal brand, what he does. He also works with the Journey to Financial Freedom. We'll get all into that good stuff, what he's doing, and if you are a young man listening or the parent of a young man, how his message should be a part of your everyday life. What's up, man? Good to talk to you today, Justin. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me, and I love what you're doing. I love the audience, and I wish I had somebody like you at that age. We'll get into some of the mistakes that I made at the young man age when it comes to money. But anyways, dude, thank you for having me. I'm excited for today.
I appreciate that. It's interesting that you lead with that. It's one of the most common things that I hear when I'm doing Building Men meetings, and I'll travel around. I'll get into an organization, a group, or a school, and I'll set up social groups for the boys, and we meet once a month right around that time frame, and there's usually other male mentors involved in it. And when young men are seeing men talk, I'm a high school sophomore, junior, and I'm seeing men communicate about things that are going on in their life. The guys say to the young men, I wish I had something like this when I was your age. Like, I wish this was available to me when I was going through the trials and tribulations. So let's start there. Let's take the time machine back. You as a young man, you're middle school, your high school age range. You're like, I wish I had something like that. So who were you when you were growing up in that middle high school age range?
So personally, I was a big time athlete. Both my parents were awesome athletes in high school and throughout childhood. And then my siblings and my sister, I'm the youngest of three. And so I've got a sister who's 2 years older than me and a brother who's 9 years older than me. And played sports growing up. We're very hardworking, disciplined people. And, my parents were successful in their own right too, as well. But when I turned 10 years old, my parents actually filed for bankruptcy. It was either the first or the second time by that point. And for many other reasons, but this being one of them, they got a divorce. Shortly after that, we lost both of our cars and our house. And when my parents moved, they obviously their credit was shot from filing for bankruptcy. So they had to go to rental properties. And the rental properties that were allowing them in wouldn't allow pets. And I had a 3-year-old Rottweiler at the time. Right. And so I had to give away my dog at 10 years old, move school districts, lose all my friends. Right. And so from a young age, I was really impacted by money. And it was confusing to me because I was like, wait, my parents are well put together people. They're successful. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were making like $150,000, $160,000 put together at the time. Right. And this happened. And so fast forward until I'm 18 years old. I'll actually kind of go backwards a little bit. When I was 13, I got hit by a car riding my bike to soccer practice. Right. My dad lawyered up and, justifiably so, because there was a lot of sports teams that I was playing on. I was playing on Olympic development teams. Right. And he had to pay to keep my spot on these teams, even while I was
Jesus.
interested. And so a lot of medical bills, right. And honestly, a lot of trauma, to be honest with you. It was really scary. It was right at the top of my neighborhood where I thought that I was safe. So it was one of those justifiable situations to hire a lawyer and get them involved. And so we ended up settling, I think, for about $80,000. And I got that money. Now, fast forward to when I was 18. I got that money when I was 18, put into my bank account. It was my money, it wasn't my parents' money. Nobody could tell me what to do with it. Right. And I moved 6 hours away to go to college in Maryland to play college lacrosse. And you could imagine how that went with $80,000 unsupervised, no financial literacy whatsoever. And, all I did was just mirror to me what I saw growing up, which was you make money or you acquire money and you just spend it stupidly. right? And immediately, Dennis, I went to the Audi car dealership and bought a brand new Audi A4, paid for it in cash, put black rims on it, put red calipers on it, and 30 something thousand dollars immediately out the door. Right. And so, not the best financial decision. And then to say that I blew that money over the next 2 years would be a compliment to how I handled it. And so, that's kind of, if you back up a little bit,
Right.
right? That's really why what I meant when I said coming in here. I really wish that I had something like this, during those middle school and teenage years.
To learn more about our programs, including one-on-one mentorship coaching, the foundation, our Building Men online group community for young men, or to bring a Building Men experience to your school, check out our website, buildingmen.io, or click the links in the bio. Now, back to the show. I'll start with the accident first. So take me back to that. So you said you were 12, 13 years old.
Yeah.
What were the injuries associated with that?
Yeah, so we were 13 years old. Me and my two buddies were riding our bikes to soccer practice. And this woman was pulling out of our neighborhood and she was going right, but looking left. And as soon as she saw no traffic was coming left, she pulled out and we were coming this way on our bikes. She hit my buddy head on, who like flew out into traffic. Thankfully, he ended up being okay. No oncoming traffic hit him. The other buddy, he dodged it. Nothing happened there. But I hit the side of the car, right? And somehow it's, kind of a little bit of a blur. I flew off and ended up underneath the car, right? And she ran my leg and my foot over, starting at like my ankle and then ran it over to the top of the foot. And so it completely crushed my ankle and my foot. And so as a soccer player, or any really athlete,
Right.
that's a pretty big injury.
Yeah. And did you have any therapy over that? Because I'm sure like we get injured, right? And when it's a regular injury, when you're a sports player, I mean, I played college baseball, I understand, my shoulder was hurt or whatever. But when it's a debilitating injury like that, and there's a traumatic event associated with it, like that gets imprinted into our psyche as a young man, right? So was that a part of it? You mentioned trauma. Did you have to go to therapy or any kind of counseling services around that?
So definitely went to physical therapy,
Yeah.
obviously, for the physical injury, but unfortunately grew up in a household where like therapy was taboo. You
Yeah.
were soft
Same.
if you talked about your emotions and your problems. I got an old school Italian father from upstate New
Yep.
York, right? And so unfortunately none of that was available. And a lot of my friends around me kind of had similar upbringings too as well. So just didn't even have a friend group to kind of come out and talk about it. But the biggest thing was that was going into my freshman year, I think, in high school, and maybe sophomore year. And so at the time, I didn't think that I was going to college to play lacrosse. I thought I was going to college to play soccer. And so it really, really beat me up just to have to sit on the sidelines the entire season and not be the star of the team like I thought I was going to be.
Did you ever slip into any level of a depression because of that?
I would say more so anger,
Okay.
right? I would get into a lot of arguments with people about my skill level. Since I couldn't prove it, I had to talk about it, right? And so a lot of posturing, proving, and protecting, because since I couldn't act with my mouth and my words, since I
Yep.
couldn't go out there and do it with my actions, which was, I think, really frustrating for me because it didn't feel right, but I didn't know how else to, I guess, protect my level of skill and who I thought I was.
Yeah, I hear you. And growing up in a family, it was a blue collar family. My father was an Italian guy who there was no talking of feelings whatsoever.
Yep.
Right? It was rub some dirt on it, stop being such a pussy. That was how I was raised as well. So I feel it there. Definitely can connect you in that way. And the other thing I recognize is with young men, a lot of times anger is misplaced emotion, just unaware of how to deal with the emotions that you're feeling, especially if it's a level of sadness,
Yes.
of emptiness, and we don't understand how to deal with that. So it comes out in an aggressive way, especially if we feel like we look weak among peers or even the opposite sex. So I connect with you there, my man. The other thing that you mentioned is having that 80 grand, being in college. And I think that would be the case for most young men. And you hear all these stories, and I'm sure you talk about it with your clients, of professional athletes who don't have any level of financial understanding, and they make all this money and they spend it immediately, and then they're broke in just a couple of years. I also think, Justin, about the idea we talk about it here in Building Men around false masculinity. And it seems like I definitely would have fallen into the same trap that you did, but it's around as you're growing up, what does masculinity mean? What are we hearing from society? You got to be the best athlete possible, bigger, faster, stronger, those kinds of things. You got to get with the most girls as you possibly can. And then you got to get the stuff, right? You got to have the shiny car, the things, right? And that's pretty much who you were. So at what point, post college, or was it in college, did you start to change your ideas around that? And was there a mentor? Was there someone that helped you along the way?
Um, I would say what came first was my change in my views and management, or what we call stewardship, right, of my money. So I got a master's degree in college in healthcare management, right? So I ended up working before I started my company in hospitals, particularly the Johns Hopkins system, on the business side of the hospital. So I ran the hospitals from like a business standpoint, right? And so 23 years old, fresh out of my master's. Thankfully, had a couple of good mentors and I interviewed really well, but I got a job that I had no business having. It just had been open for like a year or so, and they were starting to get desperate, and I was ambitious enough to take it on and at least had a master's degree. And so, with that job came a decent salary. And also, after a month or two while I was there, I was like, wow, these people really like me, and they really seem to already be investing time, money, and energy into growing me. And so thankfully at that age, I understood that that meant I was only going to make more money as I went, right? As I climbed the corporate ladder, particularly through the Johns Hopkins system, right, with the experience that I was getting. And so right then and there at 23, 24 years old, I was like, okay, I have to make a decision here to learn how to manage money, right? And because I'm only going to make more money. And I don't want to go through the same thing that I went through in my childhood. And I don't want to be one of those guys that's making a ton of money, but doesn't have any money, right? And so thankfully, part of my job description was financial management. So I just took what I was learning in the corporate financial business standpoint and just started implementing it into my personal finances. And so had been really starting to take better care of and make changes in my finances around 23, 24 years old, right? But it took me a long time to grow up holistically on the rest of everything else you mentioned, meaning for up until probably about 2 years ago when I started working with my mentor, who I'll get to here in a second, I constantly thought that I gained people's love and acceptance through my accolades, accomplishments, and
Mhm.
achievements, right? And if I wasn't accomplishing and achieving, then I wasn't going to be accepted and loved by other people, right? And I met a mentor a couple of years ago by the name of Jake Kaufman. His tagline is, he's like, I help men die before they die, right? And what he means by that is that there's two, I hope there's one thing that the young men listening uh, take a note on, remember, is what I'm about to say here, right? There's the first half of life and there's the second half of life, right? The first half of life is all about making a name for yourself through accolades, accomplishments, and achievements, and creating what we call the false self, right? And the second half of life is dying to that false self and just simply living for God, right? And so it's necessary to go through that in the first half of life, right? But I ultimately realized it was time to grow up out of that, where like I am now safe to know that like I'm not a it doesn't make me a real man isn't somebody who accomplishes, achieves, right, and has all of these accolades and has all the fancy things and gets all of the girls, right? A real man is just somebody who grows into his most authentic version of himself, right? And a lot of times that means expressing your emotions, being vulnerable. And what my mentor said to me when I first met him, he's like, this is gonna sound crazy, but he's like, weakness is the answer. Right? And what he meant by that is just admitting that like there was something wrong, right? That there was a better way to live life. I was ready to mature and grow up, but like admitting that is weakness. It's saying even though I've accomplished so much and I'm doing everything that society tells me I need to do to be a man, particularly a successful man, right? I'm doing it wrong. And so I always use the example where, thankfully, at 28 years old, I'm about to be 32 here in a couple of weeks, which is crazy to say. But at 28 years old, I became a millionaire, right? And I accomplished, thankfully, God gave me all of the materialistic things that I thought was going to make me happy, at least eternally happy, right? The amount of money I wanted to make, the business I wanted to have, the wife I wanted to have, the dream house, the dream cars, vacationing once a month, right? And all that happened was I just had the same level of anxiety and depression that I had before I accomplished those things. Not because there's anything wrong with those things, right? I don't want that to be the message here either, right? It's just I had a misconception of the objective
Mhm.
of those things, of the purpose of those things. And what I realized in the process is materialistic things or accolades, accomplishments, achievements, possessions. There's nothing wrong with them. Go after them. Make $1 million, right? Drive your dream car, right? Have your dream house. But just realize that they're amplifiers of happiness, not sources of happiness, right? And what I mean by that, amplifiers of happiness, quick, easy example here, right? When I drive my car, I love my car. I got a BMW M Series with the peanut butter brown seats, like I always wanted, 22-inch rims, right? And I'm happy while I'm in it. I'm happy, well, maybe 10 minutes after I hop out of it. But after that, I just go right back to baseline, amplifier of happiness, right? It's not going to bring you eternal happiness, which just means you're present, happy, and joyful for life. Does that make
Love
sense?
that. It definitely makes sense. Love it. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I hadn't heard the first death, second death piece.
Yeah.
Definitely going to incorporate that into my talks in the future. But I'd love to unpack a little bit. I mean, you mentioned relationship with God. It's something that you put out there in your social media posts. When you were growing up, was religion a big part of your family? Was that a big part of who you were?
Absolutely not. My parents identified as Catholics, but
Hmm.
we maybe went to church once every 3 years. And my mom went to Catholic school and she can speak from the Bible fairly decently. But when my parents got divorced, I stayed with my dad. So when my parents were together, my mom, because of my dad's influence, didn't flex the religion, if you will. And then when they got divorced, I actually stayed with my dad. And he is the furthest thing from religious. He doesn't understand God whatsoever, and he has a very distorted image of that. And so I was not shown God, Christ, religion, anything growing up. If anything, like the complete opposite. My
Right.
dad grew up, in the mobster area in New York
Hmm.
and thought he was one. And even after it ended, he still acted like that. And he's the guy who lives off the glory days because he was a star high school quarterback. And he has never had his earthly death, right? The two deaths. You have your earthly death where you die to that false self, that first half of life, that child in you, and you become a real man, right? And then you actually have your actual death. My dad's going to be one of those people that has both of his deaths 10 minutes apart. He's going to realize on his deathbed, I did this life thing wrong. I never grew up. And 10 minutes later, he's going to actually die.
Are you estranged from your father right now?
Yes, we haven't talked in a couple of years, and it's
Yeah.
because he unfortunately was very abusive physically growing up, mentally, emotionally, verbally, but like obviously as we got older, like just very emotionally, uh he's just very toxic, very, very
Hmm.
toxic. And it just nothing's ever his fault. He is a child in a 60-something-year-old man's body.
um, we have very similar upbringings, very similar old men, estranged from my father as well. I could tell by the way you were talking as I tell my story, it's a similar cadence to my communication. So I feel you there, man. I definitely feel it. Father's Day's coming up. I mean, while we're recording this episode, we're 5 or 6
Yeah.
days away from Father's Day, and you are a father yourself. Is this going to be your first Father's Day as a father?
First Father's Day of the Father.
So what are the emotions attached to upcoming Sunday? Like what are the emotions? Because I'm feeling emotions like I have 3 kids. They're 19, 7, 16, and 14 years old. So I've
Wow.
been a father for, almost 2 decades now.
Dude, you look like you're 30 something. I don't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
thank
you.
you,
It's
man. I
crazy you got
appreciate it.
kids
Yeah.
that old.
Yeah, I'm 47 years old. But
Okay.
um but I like there's emotion associated with the day for me. Not only myself as a father, but then also my relationship with my father and, all of the struggles there. So what are you thinking about as this day is coming up?
Hmm. Such a good question. From a personal standpoint, like meaning like my own daughter, right? I'm very excited from that standpoint. She'll be 3 months old tomorrow, right? So it's still very fresh. I'm still adjusting, if you will. And those first month or two, like they're really just like a little potato that
Yeah.
sleeps with a heartbeat. You know what I mean? So like they're not that interactive. And so it doesn't kick in until kind of the age she's getting now. She's awake more, she's more interactive. And so um I'm really excited from my own standpoint because I am just proud of myself for the father I've been so far and the father that I will be, and knowing what an amazing upbringing she's going to have. Not perfect, right? But I'm just really proud of myself because I've done the work over the past couple of years to really mature and grow into a real man that can be a healthy man of a household, true man and father to Peyton is her name. When it comes to my dad, it's uh, I am starting to really come to terms with that. Like, I may never speak to him ever again because he's never going to learn. A lot of the reasons why we don't talk to him anymore, my sister as well, he doesn't think that he's wrong for it. He doesn't think it's his fault, and he has shown no signs of maturing or growing whatsoever. I've never heard the man in my life ever say the words, "I'm sorry, I'm wrong," let alone it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to embody it and actually change. Right. And so for me, I'm really kind of coming to terms with that. And I think I'm starting to really just grieve the loss of my dad. And this is going to sound kind of crazy, but sometimes I've had the thoughts where, like, I almost just wish he would die because I have that, not from like a morbid, I hate him standpoint, but like, I'm missing a father right now. I don't have a dad. It's like he's dead, but there's still this physical body walking around, which is just so confusing to me, right? And it's so confusing to other people. And like, I just have this loss of a father, but also he's still here at the same time. And even if I was to forgive him and let him back in, he's not mature enough to understand boundaries. Like, hey,
Right.
dude, you and I don't have that father son relationship. Like, I'm just letting you back in slowly. I'll call you when I want to call you. And by the way, you're nowhere near allowed around my kids. He's not mature enough to understand that, right? He still doesn't, he, like people close to him, he still doesn't even tell them that like I don't talk to him, right? He still acts like everything's fine. Like it's a serious sense of delusion, and so it's frustrating for me if that makes sense. And obviously, I wish things were different. He has helped me a lot in the past. He's supported me as much as he's could, but like it's not a license just to allow
Right.
the toxicity and the abuse.
Yeah, and I feel like you and I could be the spokespeople for this like narcissistic personality
Yeah.
father club. All the things that you say definitely resonate with me. And one thing that I love is the intentionality around raising Peyton. Right? It's like like the way that you're living your life is in a very intentional way right now. So as you're thinking about the father, the man that you want to be, and it is, I remember the 3 month old thing, and then I remember when they take the first steps and all of a sudden you hear daddy for the first time. There's like those little things as you're going through it is like to really soak in those moments. And people tell you all the time they grow up quickly, which is the truth, but you never know. I mean, you'll remember the firsts, and I think whenever I think about this with myself, I get a little emotional. You remember remember the first steps, you remember the first time that they say your name, you remember the first, time they do something in sports, the first, daddy daughter dance that you go to. But no one else ever tells you there's going to be a last time. No one ever tells you there's going to be the last time that you read them a story before they go to bed at night, the last time that you walk them to school and they give you a hug before they go out and they hang out with their friends. So whenever I talk to new dads, I'm like, recognize that it's a finite amount of time. So every single moment you have, like, freaking suck it in as much as you possibly can. So with that being said, when you think about yourself as a father, what are certain things that you want to be certain that this is important? Like, my daughter Peyton needs to know this as she's growing up, that my father never taught me, that it's so important for me to teach her these couple things. What would they be?
Mm. It's okay to be weak. It's okay to admit when you're wrong. Right. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned from my dad. It was never my fault. Like it was never his fault, never my fault. Like, and my dad, I always say he raised a superstar, not a teammate. For the majority of the sports teams that I was on, I was the best player and I was rarely ever the captain.
Hmm.
Right. And so I think that says a ton right there.
Yep.
I was my own worst enemy. I was a walking self-inflicted wound because I just didn't know how to take ownership for my actions, particularly my mistakes, right? And it was always somebody else's fault. And I always was just like, screw it, right? I'm going to move on to the next thing. And I'm just going to focus on what I'm good at and not pay attention to my weaknesses or my flaws. Up until finding my wife, I was in like, from high school until finding my wife when I was 27. I was in 4 serious relationships with 4 fantastic girls. Every single one of them broke up with me for the same exact reasons, right? And it was because I could never admit that I was the problem, right? I just went to the next relationship and just did the same thing, right? And uh, I think the other thing too is, my mentor has been talking, he's been talking about it for years. He's like, you've got nothing to prove, nothing to posture, nothing to protect, right? Just be you.
Hmm.
Just be you. And so I think those are just some things that, came to mind, authentically as you asked me that question.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it definitely resonated as a former athlete, and then I coached varsity sports. When you said you were the best player on the team and not a captain, and I knew exactly the player you were. I mean, I could definitely paint a picture there. Usually, you hear the question, Justin, if you can go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself as a young man? I mean, I've heard that one many times. I'd love to know. So, based on the young man that you were, is there anything that 15, 16-year-old Justin would say to you now? Would there be anything, piece of advice that he would give to you, or would he tell you to like keep following your dreams? Like, what's something that young Justin would say to, 32-year-old Justin?
Wow, I've never been asked that before. Hmm. Forgive yourself for the mistakes that you've made. I though my parents were good people, I wasn't really around my mom a lot, who was the better parent. I just stayed with my dad when they got divorced, right? Because my mom never told me really what happened. She said, one day you'll understand, right? And when I turned 18 or 19 years old, it clicked and I really understood why she left him. But I hated her until then.
Yeah.
Right. And what happened is I wasn't around the better parent, if you will. I was around the toxic one. Right. And because of that, like I made so many mistakes. I got myself into so much shit. A lot of things just egotistically, right? And a lot of things that I carry shame and guilt around still to this day. Right. But I'm learning to forgive myself. And I think that 16-year-old me would just tell 32-year-old me, hey man, you did a bunch of stuff that honestly wasn't your fault. Right. And let it go. Forgive yourself.
And then he'd probably tell you, like, listen, maybe don't buy that Audi. We would have done a lot more
That'd
with
be the
that
second. Right
37.
after we covered that first topic,
Right.
that'd be number
It's
two.
number two. All right.
Right.
So I mentioned when we first got to know each other that I spend time in schools working with young men.
Yeah.
And in a school today, I was working with most of the boys there were juniors or sophomores or juniors in high school. And they're all in that range where they're working. And we talked about making a commitment over the summer. You have 2.5 months off of school. Don't just sleep until 11 o'clock every day, drink, smoke, watch porn, play video games. Like, don't let that be how your summer is defined. I said, and you have the idea, the poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling. You can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. Yours is the earth and all that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. It's like a powerful closure to that. So I read him the poem today, and we talked about making a commitment over the summer. And a lot of the boys they were talking about, and whatever slang they were using, making fat stacks, making bread, getting bank, like however they were saying it, but they're like, I want to make money this summer. And I said, okay, well, what's the goal then? Making money. Oh, I'm going to get a car. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, like, it was all about getting the stuff. So if you could give these guys a piece of advice right now, so say they're making money over the summer where by the end of the summer, they have uh, 4 or 5 grand. they're able to make that money over the summer, 5 grand they have saved up over the summer, and you're 17 years old. If you can give them a piece of advice, what should they start doing now? Are there a couple steps as a 17-year-old? Is it getting, starting established in credit? Should they start looking into other things? Like, what would be a couple things you would tell these guys?
So the first thing that comes to mind is to learn how to budget, right? Learn how to invest and start establishing credit. So I'll break each one down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Budgeting, unfortunately, society has made it feel like handcuffs, right? Restricting, like, it's like you did something bad if you got to go on a budget. That's the furthest thing from the truth, right? Quality budgets will allow you to live your life, right? Will allow you to spend your money. Like I tell our clients, like, I want you to live your life. I want you to spend your money, right? But in a calculated, controlled, and confident fashion, right? And when you do that, you can also make financial progress at the same time, right? And so the biggest thing I would tell them as they're hearing this, budgets allow you to live an and life, not an or life. An or life is save money or spend money, invest money, right? And be smart with my money, or go and buy things and do things I want to do. You can do both at the same time. You just need the right tool to allow that to happen. And that would be a budget, right? And the second thing would be start investing now. The sooner you start investing and get the snowball going, the snowball effect of compounding interest, right? So the earlier you start, the richer you'll be by the time you're my age, right? Or by the time they're your age, or by the time they're getting to their parents' age, right? And so what I always make the joke that besides Jesus Christ and my wife, God, the best thing God ever created was compounding interest, right? And that's how you make passive income, right? And so when you invest money, let's just say into the stock market, right? And you put $1,000 in there, right? And it makes 20%. 20% of $1,000 is $200, right? So you add that 200 to the 1,000, now you have 1,200, right? And now 20% of 1,200 is a heck of a lot more money than 20% of 1,000. And that's how compounding interest works. It starts to compound on top of each other because the interest gets added into what you've invested of your own money. And the percentage of what you're making now gets larger, and then that gets added back in. Another percentage of what you're making now gets larger, and that gets added back in. The faster and the sooner that you can start that snowball effect, if you will, or just start taking advantage of compounding interest, the better. I wish in high school I started investing. And thankfully have a decent financial situation right now, but I'd have tens and tens of millions of dollars, right, that just were made passively for me if I just started investing and getting compounding interest starting as soon as possible, right? And so the easiest way for them to start to getting invested or set them to start investing is to download an app called Robinhood, right, which allows any person to start investing and to start investing their extra money into what is called the S&P 500, right? The S&P 500 is just a collection of the 500 best companies in the United States, right? And it's monitored, I believe, weekly, if not monthly, where it's basically ranked in number 1 to 500. So if like 500 drops to 502, then like somebody swaps that automatically, right? So you're always investing in the top 500 companies in the United States, right? As you can imagine, right, the top 500 companies in the United States are successful companies. And what that means is over time, they're going to become more valuable. So as you buy in right now and you're, let's just say, buying Nike stock for $100 right now, in 5 years, when it's worth 500, you've 5 times your money, right? And so whatever extra money that you have, right, outside of spending on a few things that you may want, right? So you can learn balance, you can learn budget, you can learn an and life early on, but utilize as much money as you possibly can to invest in the S&P 500 and let it sit there over the years. And you'll just make money while you sleep. You'll make money while you go to school. You'll make money while you're eating, right? If you're listening to this podcast as you're out for a walk, you're just making money, hanging out, right? And so that would be the second thing. And then the third thing would be to build credit, right? If you can open up a credit card right now and use it for expenses that you already have, right? I'm not saying go to the mall and ball out the Louis Vuitton store. Do not go buy the new gaming system that you don't have money to pay back, right? Like you're going to go to the gas station and probably fill your car right? You're going to eat out with your buddies, at the restaurants a couple of times. You might have a gym membership, right? You might have you might buy some books off Amazon, right? Like you're already spending money. You might as well utilize the credit card to spend that money, pay it off immediately, and start building your credit right now, right? And by the time that they graduate college, let alone high school, right? They'll probably have a credit score in the 700s just by following that, right? And so if you understand an or life by budgeting, right, and life, excuse me, by budgeting, if you start to invest now in the S&P 500 and start to build your credit, in a couple of years, again, when you graduate high school, let alone college, you'll be in a better financial situation than 95% of Americans.
What about kids that are like, oh, I want to invest in NFTs or cryptocurrency? What's your advice to them?
I would ask them why,
I think it's like
right?
new and shiny. It's like
Right,
I think that that's a piece of it as well. It seems like
right,
it's more Gen Z
right,
to do that. That's just something that I've heard from young men as well.
right. I would say that like your investing strategy should be based on your goals. Right. And so if your goals are to make predictable but large amounts of money passively over time, then there's really nothing better than the S&P 500. Right. There's over the past 25 or 35 years, it's grown on average at a 10% rate per year. Some years obviously up in the 30s, other years, closer to the negatives. That's why the average comes out to 10, but it's basically guaranteed large amounts of passive free money over the long haul, right? You can't say that as much with cryptocurrency and NFTs. I'm not saying that I don't invest in those things and don't believe in those things, right? But they have limited money right now, and we
Hmm.
want to go towards guaranteed, almost guaranteed returns. And the S&P 500 over the next 10, 20, 30 years is just about a guaranteed large return on investment, right? I can't say those for the other things.
Right. I've heard a lot around the time to take the risks are when you're in your late teens, early 20s. If you're going to take a risk, that's the time to do it because you have a lot more time. For me to take a huge financial risk right now, a couple of years away from 50, that's a challenge. That's not the right time. I need to be playing it much more conservatively right now. How do you talk to kids about, well, they want to take a risk and try, putting a couple more bucks into a stock that has a chance to boom, but it also has a chance to bust?
Yeah, I think just be okay with know your risk and be okay with it. Right. So there really is limited risk. It's like you've got $3,000 you're trying to invest, like, and you're 16 years old with no kids and you have no bills, then really your only risk is losing that $3,000 that you could probably earn back if you just go pick up a few more shifts. So I'm cool with it. I just even older people, I just tell them like just understand the risk and be okay with it, right? And ultimately make sure the reward outweighs the risk
Right.
though, you know.
So the other group of people that are listening to this podcast are the parents of those kids that I was talking about, right? And so they're in a different space. So now they have the mortgage, they have the 2 car payments, they got the kid in college. They're still trying to go to Disneyland once a year for the kid. Like those that's the other group of people. Is there any different advice that you would give to parents that are in their late 40s, early 50s, they're raising a teenage son? Is there any advice that you would give to them that's different?
1,000%. I would say have your investment strategies just match your goals, right? So you have to see, really, we have to start and sit down and figure out what are your goals, right? And then from there, figuring out which ones make sense to go after first, second, third, and which ones we can maybe attack in parallel, right? We call it cadence of accomplishments. So I'll give you an example. When we meet with parents, there's people that like, I want to pay down my high interest credit card debt. I want to buy a house or a rental property, right? And I want to start maxing out my 401k. Great. Which one should we go after first,
Right.
right? And so most times, if you want to buy a house, we should probably pay off the high credit card debt first. Like, okay, we're going to utilize your funds, right, to do this, right? And so then we'll do this next and this third, right? And then from there, we just got to ask yourself, like, what cash flow do you have to go towards these goals? So after you pay all your bills each month and have a little lifestyle baked in there, how much money is left over to allocate towards these goals? So understanding the goals and then how much money we have left over each month to go towards these goals will ultimately dictate the strategy, because there's no cookie cutter approach to finances, Dennis. I tell people that all the time. Like, I could sit here and give people blanket general advice and it might get them some decent results, but there's a massive difference between decent and optimal, right? And that gap is extremely costly, not even just money wise. So what you want to do is understand what we call your unique variables. What make you different? Your age, where you live, what are your goals, what are your fears, right? How much do you make a year? What do you do for a living, right? How many kids do you have? Like, and then utilize those unique variables to build you a custom strategy that will ultimately get you best results. Right. And so honestly, like, if I could take everything back that I just said before that, my biggest advice to the parents would be understand your unique variables and then build your financial strategy around that. Because what works for you might not work for the next
Right.
person. What works for me might not be best for them. Right. And stop listening to your uncle at the barbecue who has no financial experience whatsoever. Right. And stop living out of fear. Ask yourself, not what if this happens, but out of fear, but what if this happens out of abundance? Right.
Love that. And it's interesting. One of the things I tell my son is he decided to go to college. He's doing materials engineering as his major. But I told him, I had a conversation with him when he was about 16, 17 years old. And I said, listen, his name is Denny. Listen, Den, when you're making that decision, don't feel like you need to go to college. Like you have to go to college. It's not everyone's track in life. And if that's not your track, that's okay. But what I would say is be really intentional about what are your goals in life? Like start dialing in on those things. And if it is to potentially open up a business or do something, go and learn from someone who's doing it really well. You spend time with that person. That is, if you want to be a millionaire, spend time with people, volunteer, do something to add value to their life so you could learn the tricks of the trade that way. Same thing. So Uncle Buck at the barbecue, he might not be the best mentor for you in that space. Go find someone who's doing something somewhere that you want to be a couple steps ahead of you in your life. So I'd love to close the loop on your journey to make sure that we have an opportunity to give you a chance to talk about what you're doing right now. So where we paused in your story, Justin, you were working at Johns Hopkins. You were in this financial space. You were starting to figure it out a little bit. So how did you get from there to where you are now? And let us know, like, what exactly are you doing right now? And talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Hopkins, I actually started off there in undergrad as a nursing assistant. I did my undergrad studies in nursing and pre-med with the original intentions of becoming a physician. And I, unfortunately, when I was at Stevenson, that's where I played college lacrosse, had a great experience. We won a national championship, ended up being an All-American. First team all conference. We won like 3 conference championships. So it was a good experience, but I tore my ACL 4 times while I was there. Right. And so the fourth time I ended up playing, it was like in November, right before my senior season started in January. So I didn't have any time to get surgery. And so I played with it torn, but I stuck around for an extra year to utilize one of my extra years of eligibility, because obviously I had a ton getting injured that many times. And so I got my master's degree in healthcare management and just thought it was going to be a bridge in between undergrad and medical school, just so I could play one more year of college lacrosse. Right. But at the end of it, I was like, I actually really like this field. I don't have to go back to school any longer. I can make a similar amount as doctors and actually have a normal lifestyle, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And that's kind of how I got into, the business side of hospitals. And so worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital then for about 2 years as a division administrator, and then transferred to one of our community hospitals and became the physician manager there at like, I think I was like 25, 26 years old, and became the physician manager where I was overseeing like just short of 1,000 doctors and had multi-million dollars in financial responsibility and reported directly to the president of the hospital. So
Uh,
it was an awesome experience, right, for about 2 years. And I just learned so much. And then COVID hit and I was working from home. And right before COVID hit, my wife and we went to Hawaii. And I was like, man, I need to figure out how to live my life on my own terms for the rest of my life. And I called my financial advisor, literally got off the beach when that vision hit me. It was like, screw this 9 to 5 thing. I'm going to live life on my own terms. And I called him and I was like, when can I retire? And he ran a few numbers and he was like 56. At the time, I was like 27. I was like, yeah, screw that. I'm not waiting that long. It's 30 years from now. And so I started listening to a ton of podcasts, reading a ton of books. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I highly recommend to anybody listening. Ed Milet's podcast, JLD, John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneurs on Fire. Just so many books, so many podcasts. And one thing that really stuck out to me, they said, your business is at the intersection of your expertise and your passion. Right. And so at the time, I had an expertise in finances and a passion for helping other people, particularly not go through what I went through growing up. And so August 2020 comes, I launch JFF, which is my business, Journey to Financial Freedom. And we do financial coaching for business owners. We started off as financial coaching for young families. But after a couple of years went by, we started to realize that like our favorite clients, they all had one thing in common, and the majority of them were entrepreneurs or business owners. And so we were like, let's just niche to that, right? Particularly because there's unlimited income that can be made as a business owner. And a lot of people know how to make money, but just about nobody knows how to manage it, right? So a lot of people making money, not a lot of people keeping money, right? And so our second year in business, we did 7 figures, right? Which was awesome. And then last year did it again, and on track to do it again this year too as well. I've got a team of about 11 people that work for me. We've got about a couple hundred clients around the world, and we're not where I want us to be, but we're having a ton of success right now. So it's kind of how I got into it.
That's awesome, dude. The intersection of expertise and passion. I love that, and that'll be a way also that I explain it to young men as well. And I feel blessed to be sitting at that sweet spot in my life with what I'm doing. It takes a long time to get there. I wish, again, for me to go back and have the conversation with a younger me, saying like, when you have that feeling like you did, screw that. I'm not waiting that long. I stayed as a middle school principal for 15 years, and I wish I would have gone back and done it earlier. But they say like the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So if you're listening, start whatever that is today. Talk to us a little bit about the podcast, Holistic Hustle. Tell us a little bit about what that podcast is, and is it on every Spotify, Apple? Can we find it in all the places?
Yeah, it is. It's on all the major platforms. And holistic Journey to Financial Freedom is my business, very financial business related. But like I have my own personal brand too as well, right? And there's a lot more to me than JFF and money and business. And so the Holistic Hustle podcast is I created it to help people work hard for the right reasons, go after success, accolades, and accomplishments for the right reasons, right? And I heard this quote from Brandon Bouchard a couple of years back where he said, "You're not a true high performer if other important areas of your life, like your health and relationships, are negatively impacted because of your pursuit of materialistic and professional success." Right. And so I'd always been very successful professionally, materialistic wise, athletically, but every other area of my life always hurt. Right. And so holistic hustle is let's be successful in every area of your life, right? And not just successful in one area when every other area is hurting because of that. Right. And like there's nothing wrong with working hard, having success and accomplishing things. You just want to do it for the right reasons, right? Reasons that bring us closer to God, not further away from God, right? Like, are your intentions behind that success, your intentions behind what you're trying to accomplish, your intentions behind your goal, are they healthy or unhealthy? Right. And ultimately, I want to help people build healthy intentions and motives and a holistically successful life through that podcast.
Awesome. And I'm sure it lights you up when you do it, and you're talking to other people that are passionate about what they're doing. And much like this conversation for me, like I will leave this with my bucket filled. Like and I will have conversations based on this conversation. So I appreciate you being here. You mentioned Brendan Burchard. I have a shelf full of old high performance planners on my shelf. I mean, he was the guy. I mean, as I was going through leaving public education and getting into the entrepreneurial world, he was a guy that I listened to on a regular basis. So definitely speaks to me there. Before I ask the last question, Justin, where can we find you? How do we get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram, Justin_Buonomo. Also my YouTube channel, in addition to my podcast, are awesome place to just find me on YouTube as Justin Buonomo. Got a lot of awesome content over there. And for the young men listening, feel free to DM me. Feel free to, however you want, contact me. More than happy to talk. I'm also a high school lacrosse coach. Actually, very grateful to coach the #1 team in the country the past 3 years, McDonough School out of Maryland. And so I know young men very well. I've been coaching lacrosse for a while, and it's one of my biggest goals for my personal brand is to pour into young men. And for any parents that are listening, that are business owners, also feel free to DM me, right? More than happy to figure out if and how we can help you. And I'm going to be giving away a free training to your audience, which is called How to Make and Save More Money. And this is a training that I did for our exclusive community of high ticket clients. And we've decided to give it away to your audience for free. And so I hope people enjoy that. And anybody that is interested in just learning more about how we can help you, in addition to everything we talked about today, there will be a Calendly link that we'll put in the show notes where you can book a call with one of my team members from JFF, Journey to Financial Freedom, where we do the financial coaching for business owners and really just help business owners get their finances together, right? So they can run their dream business and live their dream life, right? And most people don't ever do that because of this thing called finances. And so we figure out if and how we can help you and go from there.
Appreciate it. We'll put all that in the show notes, like you mentioned. I appreciate the grateful for the opportunity for the audience. Final question, Justin, I always ask to the guest is anyone who's listening right now after the last hour or so got a ton of value from this episode, but they press stop right now and they could do one thing, and this one thing that they do can really change the trajectory of their life, especially if it's a young man. What's one thing that they can do right now?
Just a couple of things come to mind. I think the biggest asset and the best investment that you can make is in yourself, right? There's this stat that only 10% of your happiness and presence comes externally. The other 90% is internally, right? So start asking yourself, why am I the way I am? And is it serving me? Right. And if it's not, start to ask yourself, the hard questions on how you can grow into a better individual. And I love the quote that says, your life and your wealth, but your life in totality will expand into direct proportion to the hard conversations you're willing to have with yourself, other people, and God. Right. And so act on that, right? Realize that all the answers and success that you want are internal, not external. And I think that your life will drastically change.
Mic drop moment right there, my man. That was powerful stuff. Really, really appreciate it. Justin Buonomo, dude, it was awesome to get to know you. Hopefully we continue this conversation. I really enjoyed connecting with you. I'd love to share your information out there with all the young men that I speak to, because I do think that this is an important thing. So instead of them just saying, I'm going to go out and make bread, I'm going to make fat stacks of cheddar, like Jesse used to say on Breaking Bad. Well, what are you going to do? Like, what are your plans to go ahead and do so? And I believe in that. Like, okay, how are you going to get from point A to point B? So dude, really, really appreciate it. To the audience, if you've gotten any value from this episode, please consider rating it, reviewing it, and more than anything, sharing this episode out with anyone that you think might get value from the message. Go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.